Our speaker today is one the congregation is well familiar with. His title will be Reflection on Celtic Spirituality, and he's well qualified to speak on that. Gerry studied theology at St. Patrick's Seminary and University, Menlo Park, California, studied at Holistic Learning Center, Incorporated, studied English language and literature at the University of Ulster, Coleraine, and he's from Enniskillen. So I'll give you Gerry Murphy. I hope I didn't mess it up too bad.
Okay. All right, so before we start, Jim, welcome back, my friend. Good to see you. And did not want to draw the spotlight to you, but I wanted to acknowledge your return. Thank you. All right, so as you know, when I speak up here, I usually give you the backdrop to how I chose my topic. Well, it's St. Patrick's Day. I'm the token Irish guy. It's kind of a no-brainer. However, you do need to get invited. So a couple of months ago, I was at the Tumble Creek Cider Tap Room listening to Jenna Green singing, and Dawn, our new speaker schedule person, says, "Gerry, what are you doing in March?" "Oh, look, Sunday the 17th, St. Patrick's Day. How about something on Celtic spirituality?" So there you go. That's the backdrop. All right, so here's what I'm going to do. I will talk a little bit about St. Patrick, because I don't know very much about St. Patrick. There's a lot, there's more, myth and legend than there is historical fact. However, there is a lot of history to this person, St. Patrick. He did leave one book. It's the Confessions of St. Patrick. The words you just listened to, St. Patrick's breastplate, it's a very popular prayer attributed to St. Patrick. It's really a shield for divine protection, because according to tradition, Patrick wrote it in 433 AD for divine protection before successfully converting the Irish King Lear and his subjects, who were pagan, to Christianity. So that's where the words from St. Patrick's breastplate come from. But who was St. Patrick? Well, he wasn't born Patrick, and he wasn't born in Ireland. Let's start with that. As far as we know, he was born around 385 AD in what was called Roman Britain, probably in Wales. That's what most scholars would agree on. He was born Maiwyn Sucat, and sure enough, Maiwyn has a kind of a Welsh ring to it. But at the age of 16, he was captured by Irish raiders, probably slave traders. And I do remember in high school, when we were being taught all of this, loving the name of the person who was at the head of this gang who captured Patrick. His name was Niall of the 9 Hostages. Always thought that was a glamorous title. So he was responsible for capturing Patrick, or Maiwyn Sucat, taking him to Ireland at age 16, and he was put to work as a slave, as a shepherd and a goat herd. And he did this for about 6 years. Somehow he escaped the Emerald Isle and ended up somewhere in Europe. Again, most scholars think it was somewhere like in Belgium. And there he studied, and at some point later returned to Britain, was ordained a Roman Catholic priest, and later on a Roman Catholic bishop at a very young age, I think in his early 20s. Now, after becoming a bishop, he had this fond connection with Ireland, even though he was a slave there for 6 years. He had a deep emotional, spiritual connection to the people and the land. So he decided he would return there at the risk of his life to convert the pagan Irish to Christianity. So off he went, and this is where there are many stories and legends about him confronting the Irish pagan chieftains, how he survived those encounters. So there's a lot of myth and legend around that. But he did survive, and he did somehow pull off this converting the pagan Irish at the time to Christianity. His approach was really marked by humility and compassion and a deep, profound understanding of Irish culture, which he nurtured while there. The way he would do it was he kind of incorporated existing Celtic symbols like the sun. If you think of the Celtic cross, you see the circle, and then you have the cross with all these gospel scenes inscribed on the stonework. Well, he's combining the circular symbol representing the sun, which was a sacred symbol in Celtic paganism, with the Celtic cross. So this was kind of his way of intertwining and not offending the native Celtic spiritual culture. The one about the shamrock, that's a little more of a myth, but who knows? The idea that he used the 3-clove shamrock to represent the doctrine of the Trinity, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. That's a little more of a myth, but then what do we know? To converting them to Christianity and an understanding of Christian doctrine. All right, so what else can I say about St. Patrick? Not a lot. Not a lot. I mean, growing up in Ireland, we didn't do very much. The Boy Scouts would parade, they'd come to church, they'd play their trumpets at the consecration of the Mass. We wore shamrocks. Corned beef and cabbage was unheard of in Ireland. I'm sorry to tell you that, give you that bad news. But that was adopted by the first wave of Irish immigrants from their Jewish neighbours, and they were all poor, and that's all they could afford. I grew up eating, cabbage and bacon and potatoes, but never heard of corned beef till I came over here. So there you go. So put that one aside. Okay. But anyway, in a word, Patrick's legacy is really a spirituality of compassion, of humility, and of devotion to a people and a land that he fell in love with and chose to make his home. So from there, I thought I would go into a little bit about Celtic spirituality, which both predates and postdates Patrick. And you will be relieved to know it's more than about fairies and leprechauns and pots of gold. So let's get into Celtic spirituality. So it's an ancient tradition, and like many other indigenous native spiritualities, it's rooted in the natural world. It's rich in symbolism. It's imbued with a profound sense of interconnectedness. If you think of like conventional materialistic sciences, at least as we traditionally understand them, they have a false kind of picture of duality, of separating the individual from the world, which I think it's a denial of our fundamental nature, namely that we're one. I basically think we're one interwoven web of what I call spiritual consciousness. There really isn't a separation of spirit and matter. And the concept, again, as in many indigenous cultures, this concept is at the heart of Celtic spirituality. Okay, I'm just going to share 4 to 5 tenets of Celtic spirituality. There are a lot more, but these, I think, are the core tenets of Celtic spirituality. So, the first one is harmony with nature. Central to Celtic spirituality is the belief in the sacredness of nature. So the Celts revered the land, the sea, the mountains, really as manifestations of divine presence. They saw themselves as custodians rather than conquerors of the natural world, living in harmony with its rhythms and cycles. And this reverence for nature is very evident in Celtic art, literature, mythology, where the trees, the rivers, the animals are often depicted as sacred symbols. The best example I can think of that is what's called the Book of Kells. It's an illuminated manuscript, gospel manuscript. You have the 4 gospels in this beautiful, artistically illuminated text. It's quite big and quite long. It contains the 4 gospels of the New Testament. It was created around 800 AD. And the illustrations are both extravagant and complex. The decoration combines traditional Christian iconography with the kind of ornate swirling motifs of what was typically called insular art. If you'd like to see the Book of Kells, apart from going online, if you happen to be in Dublin, go to Trinity College, into their main stunning library, which is a work of art in itself. But a centerpiece of the library in Trinity College Dublin is they have a kind of a glass display unit or cabinet where the Book of Kells is displayed, and every day a new page is turned over. It really is an art treasure of the world, worth a visit next time you're in downtown Dublin. All right. The second tenet of Celtic spirituality, I'm just going to say a brief word on, is this concept or term Anam Cara. So Anam Cara in Gaelic means soul friend. So it connotes this concept of a deeply, it's really what I would call a spiritual, moral friendship between two people. They don't need to be in a romantic relationship or married. It could be someone in a monastic setting who has a spiritual advisor who becomes their Anam Cara. But the bond between the souls, it's about nurturing that growth, that understanding, that mutual support. So it's really the idea of embodying a companionship for the journey of life. And I use it when I officiated weddings. I generally try and remember this concept of Anam Cara to talk about marriage in terms of it being a spiritual, moral companionship, because if that's its foundation, it will endure and be faithful and grow. Now, if you want to read a little bit around Anam Cara, the best book I can recommend to you, and it's not a scholarly work, it's more of a philosophical, poetical work, is Anam Cara, Ancient Wisdom from the Celtic World by John O'Donoghue. It's a beautiful, beautiful work. Became a world bestseller. But it'll give you a beautiful, poetic introduction to Celtic spirituality. Okay, third tenet I want to just expound on a little bit is what is known in Celtic spirituality as thin places. There is a Gaelic term for it. I'm not going to attempt to pronounce it because I'm not sure. But anyway, the idea is that the ancient Celts acknowledged the existence of what they would have called thin places, locations where the veil between the physical and the spiritual worlds is particularly thin. Now, these places are often found in natural settings, as in ancient forests, mist-covered mountains, or by the tranquil lakes. And the thin places invite contemplation, meditation, and communion with the divine. So they really served as portals to deeper spiritual experiences. However, these thin places became a source of fear and unease during what was called the Festival of Samhain. Samhain, Samhain, is the Gaelic word for November. So, back in the day, in ancient Celtic spiritual times, the festival of Samhain marked the end of the Celtic year and the beginning of the new one, and as such really can be seen as equivalent to New Year's Eve. So the Celts believed that night preceded day, and so the festivities took place on the eve of Samhain, which would be October 31st. So they believed that on this night that the veil between the physical and the spiritual realms was particularly thin, and they were afraid of, let's say, disaffected spirits of deceased loved ones returning to rectify the score in some way, get their own back for those they were had some kind of a grievance with. So those who were living had this superstition. So what did they do? They built bonfires. They put on masks and wore scary costumes and danced around the bonfires as a way of warding off these supposed spirits. And that's where Halloween came from, right? But how did it come from? Well, let's get into that. So the church got in on the act and decided it was going to co-opt and Christianize all the pagan festivals, not only in Ireland, but in other places around Europe as well. So this is what happened. The eve of Samhain, October 31st, became Halloween, which is Old English for eve of the holy day. November the 1st, in the Catholic Christian calendar, is All Saints' Day. So that's where your Halloween comes from, eve of the holy day. And, or if you think of, for example, December the 25th, when we mark the birthday of Christ. Well, we don't know when the historical Jesus was born. It's over 2,000 years ago. But the church decided in its wisdom it would be December the 25th. Why? Because it's very close to the winter solstice, to symbolize that the darkness is beginning to recede and the light of the world is emerging. So if that's the case, then you got to rewind 9 months to when Jesus would have been born, and you get March the 25th, which on the Catholic Christian calendar is the feast of the Annunciation, when the angel Gabriel announced to Mary she would conceive and give birth to a son. So that's how the church Christianized and co-opted all of the pagan festivals, or at least some of the most important ones. All right, so fourth tenet of Celtic spirituality would be called what they would refer to as the Wheel of the Year. So it's basically their sacred calendar, which marks the change in seasons and agricultural cycles. And it's rooted in the natural rhythms of the earth. There are actually 8 festivals. The festival of Samhain is just one. There's Imbolc, there's Beltane, and Lunasa. And each festival is celebrated with rituals, feasting, and storytelling, honouring the interconnectedness of all life and the eternal cycle of birth, growth, death, and rebirth. The Wheel of the Year. Okay. The next one is what I would call syncretism and adaptation. Now, Celtic spirituality is characterized by its openness to syncretism and adaptation. Throughout history, the Celts, they readily absorbed and integrated elements from other cultures into their belief systems and into their art and indigenous traditions. So the syncretic approach allowed Celtic spirituality to really to evolve and to thrive, embracing diversity while maintaining its core values of reverence for nature and its interconnectedness. Examples in art, I'm wearing one. This, I think, Harry made for me, if you probably can't see it from down there, is the Celtic knot. So the Celtic knot kind of symbolizes Celtic kind of Christian recognition of, again, of the interwovenness of all things. It's applied to God and nature, humanity, and all of the cultures that compose humanity. Another one would be, again, the Celtic cross I mentioned earlier, symbolizing the entirety of the world contained within what they would call the mystical body of Christ. And then this is one I didn't really know about. I found this called the Celtic Triskelion. Well, I know about it, I just didn't know the name. It's the threefold spiral, three spirals kind of connecting with each other, which symbolize the unfolding fractal nature of the world and the Trinity, through which God can be understood in three coexisting personalities. The best example of that, next time you're over in Ireland, would be to go to Newgrange. Newgrange is an ancient burial chamber, of which there are quite a few in Ireland, but this is probably the most famous one. It's over on the eastern seaboard, not about an hour out of Dublin. After you've visited the Book of Kells, go up to Newgrange. That's right. So the book of this spiral, this interconnecting spiral, you'll get a great example of that at the entrance to Newgrange. Now, Newgrange itself is another fascinating example of Celtic sort of spirituality or beliefs. It was built on a hillside at such an angle that, when the sun comes over the horizon at the winter solstice on a clear day, which hopefully you get, if you get a clear, cloudless morning, and as the sun comes up over the horizon, it sends a really pencil-thin beam of light right across the mountainside through this narrow passageway in and illuminates the center of Newgrange burial chamber. And how they figured that out from an engineering point of view 5,000 years ago, which is 1,000 years older than the pyramids, is quite a mystery, but they did. And if you want to be there on that morning to see this actually physically happen, you need to get yourself on a waiting list. And that could be at least a year, I believe. But that's Newgrange, and at the entrance you'll see a beautiful example of this, the threefold spiral, symbolizing the unfolding fractal nature of the world and the Trinity. All right, coming into land, so just sit tight, just two more. This one is the Bardic tradition. So the Bardic tradition plays, again, a crucial role in Celtic spirituality, preserving and transmitting wisdom through poetry, music, storytelling, dancing, and so on. So the bards were revered as custodians of oral tradition, weaving tales that celebrated the beauty of the natural world. They honored ancestral heritage and they conveyed spiritual insights. A key term here in the Bardic tradition is what is called seanos, Gaelic for old style or in the old way. So you have seanos, Irish music, seanos, Irish dancing, seanos, storytelling. So if you're a purist, if you think of Riverdance and all the offshoots from Riverdance, that would not be seanos. That's a little more sophisticated and contemporary. The seanos is the pure old style of dancing, of music, of singing, and of storytelling. But the point being that it evokes centuries of tradition, when people kept the Gaelic culture alive through song, telling stories passed down from one generation to the next, the Bardic tradition. And lastly, hospitality and the generosity of the ancient Celtic world. So the Celts practiced a culture of hospitality known as co-living, really where guests and pilgrims and travellers were welcomed into their homes and honoured as members of their community. Again, if you've been to Ireland and you've stayed in an Irish guest house, and they kind of welcome you into their home, and they live there, and you get the big Irish breakfast and the whole welcome and all the trappings. That comes from the ancient Celtic co-living practice from a long, long time ago. That's the hospitality and generosity. So, just in conclusion, I would say, the Celtic spirituality definitely, when you study it and read, it offers profound insights into what really is a timeless wisdom that resonates deeply with the human soul. Its principles of harmony with nature, the idea of soul friendship, reverence for the sacred, and openness to diversity inspire, I believe, and cultivate the idea of deeper connection, especially in the fragmentation and polarization that we live with here in the Western world. And only one recommended reader. I'm not a scholar of Celtic spirituality at all, but I do love the writing of John O'Donoghue. I actually met him one time in California. He died in 2008. But his seminal work was Anam Cara, the one I mentioned, Ancient Wisdom from the Celtic World. And he followed that with Eternal Echoes, exploring the human hunger to belong. And then posthumously, his book, To Bless the Space Between Us, was published. And it's a beautiful book of prayers and blessings, and I've used it here. The last interview with John O'Donoghue was with Krista Tippett on the On Being podcast, which is one of my favorites, and that would have been in the early part of 2008, and he died in the summer of 2008. That's the last interview he did, and you'll find it on YouTube or anywhere online. And that's really it from me, except to say that our closing hymn, Be Thou My Vision, is a translation of an ancient Irish poem set to the music of an old Irish folk tune titled With My Love on the Road. And with that, I am also on the road. Thank you.